The United Nations General Assembly is underway in New York. Morgan Ortagus is former spokesperson for Mike Pompeo at the U.S. Department of State, and now founder, CEO of Polaris National Security at polaris-us.org. And Morgan Ortagus is joining me now on the Scott Sand Show as she walks through the streets of downtown New York.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's fine. So, do you feel safe walking the streets of New York?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm in Midtown, right?
Yeah.
So
you're the nice parts. And the city, I'm sure during the UN General Assembly is just like completely shut down as it is.
Yeah, it is, and there's no point in getting in a taxi. So you just have to, walk or take the subway. But no, I think it's probably better to walk than take the subway at this point.
Yeah, you get your steps in. So earlier today, President Biden delivered his final address to the UN General Assembly and is trying to shape, I guess, his legacy of foreign policy with the world. But I'm not sure he succeeded in reshaping opinions of that.
It was interesting to me that he kind of led off defending what I think is he has a lot of failures, but to me, his biggest foreign policy failure is, of course, what happened in Afghanistan with that disastrous and chaotic withdrawal that resulted in the death of 13 American service members, but also resulted in us leaving Americans and allies behind. And the fact that he sort of chose to lead with that and defend that, to me, was a little bit of a interesting place to go. I think I would have glossed over that point.
Yeah, I don't think I would have brought that up at all.
I was like, all right, well, that's a choice. But, listen, ultimately, the world is in a much, much more dangerous place under his leadership and that of Kamala Harris. And, nobody is responsible for that, but him. And we've seen not only resurgent Russia and China, we see a resurgent Iran. Everybody forgets, especially as it relates to DPRK, which is North Korea. Sorry, I'm using State Department lingo.
Right.
As it relates to North Korea, the Biden administration basically hasn't even talked to them for the last 4 years. No diplomacy that I can tell of. It hasn't talked to them. And why does that matter? Well, DPRK, North Korea, has ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons that can reach the homeland. I mean, they have the capability with some of their sophisticated weaponry to hit anywhere in the United States. So if that's the case, if somebody can hit in the continental United States the way that the North Koreans can, I think that I would maybe name a North Korean envoy and try to talk to them. But, nothing. Crickets.
Yeah, crickets there. And really it's been behavior and failures like the Afghanistan withdrawal that's led to some of this turmoil around the world, because I think the rest of the world sees a weakened role for the United States as a result of the Biden-Harris foreign policy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I mean, I was just talking to the Danish Prime Minister whenever I was interviewing her. And by the way, she reminded me that they, under her leadership in the last 4 years, have gone up to, I think they're at 2.4% of spending on their GDP and increasing. And I said, well, that's wonderful. And she said, no, it's not wonderful. It's necessary. And so there are leaders in Europe that get it. There's a couple of loud voices that don't. But I think when you look at Norway, when you look at Finland, when you look at Denmark, these Nordic countries that are near Russia, Sweden, they get it. That's why they're joining NATO, and that's why they're making sure that their defense spending is over 2%. They're committed to the security between the United States and their countries.
And was that an interesting conversation with the Prime Minister of Denmark? Because that's a country that's about as socialist as you could get. They're social democrats, and she's been the Prime Minister, I think, for about 5 years now. Yeah,
that's right. Well, listen, I'll let everybody. I don't want people interfering in our presidential election or our internal politics. So I'll let her do what they're going to do in their country, right? That's up for their voters. But if she's spending over 2.4%, and if she's committed and has skin in the game as it relates to the alliance, I'll take that every day.
We're talking to Morgan Ortagus, former spokesperson for the State Department and now founder and CEO at Polaris National Security, polaris-us.org. As Biden was saying farewell to the UN General Assembly, He said peace is still possible, even as there's violence around the world, especially in the Middle East, where we're sending more arms, more troops, and we can get to Ukraine as well. But obviously, Israel has ramped up their efforts against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and still has not resolved the conflict with Hamas. We still have hostages in Gaza. So I mean, I don't know what peace he sees at hand, but it's certainly not happening in the Middle East.
Definitely not. It's sad. It doesn't. It's sad not only for the loss of life, but because it doesn't have to be that way. And listen, you've seen what's happened in the brilliant operations Israel's conducted against Hezbollah, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been warning Hezbollah for a year. It's driving me crazy, the news media, whenever I flip on the news, and people say things like, "Oh, we might, this is escalatory from Israel, and we might go into all-out war." Escalatory from Israel? Give me a freaking break. Over the past year, since October 7th, Hezbollah has launched almost 10,000 rockets into Israel. Not only have they done that, they just killed kids on a playground in northern Israel, and you have almost 80,000 Israelis who can't go home, who haven't been able to go home for a year because of the Hezbollah rocket fire. So I just kind of want to call a big BS on the media pretending that somehow Israel is escalating. When did Hezbollah stop the rockets? I missed that.
It's defensive, if anything, and I wouldn't blame any country for defending themselves the way Israel has done, nor would I encourage Israel to stop these retaliatory strikes until the threat is eliminated. You've got that's peace through strength, which seems to be a concept that many Democrats and Kamala Harris don't seem to understand.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, we're only going to see these wars prolonged, whether it's in the Middle East, in Europe, God forbid anywhere else, as long as you have the whole philosophy behind their leadership is we want to manage escalation. And I just want to push back on that philosophy coming from the Biden-Harris team, because I think all they're doing is managing to prolong conflict whenever they try to manage escalation.
Well, and we can look at the same managing conflict through extending it as we look at Ukraine's efforts to repel Russia from their country, and President Zellinsky obviously in town in New York for the UN General Assembly as well. Probably will leave with more money again.
Yeah, probably. Well, I don't know if he's going to get it from the UN. I mean, at this point, you've got China and Russia on the Security Council that can veto anything. So it's pretty hard to get anything through the UN Security Council these days.
So, I mean, as you look at this, though, President Zellinsky was traveling with Kamala Harris to the swing state of Pennsylvania yesterday, and along with Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, was signing armaments that we're paying to send to Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I want, I would like to see a defeat of Russia. I don't think them invading Ukraine is good for anybody. It's certainly not good for Ukrainians. It's not good for the war. It's not good for America. Whenever dictators and despots think that they can, just invade and take things at will. Now, saying that, I think former President Trump has the right focus. He's focused on the economy. He's focused on getting Americans groceries that they can afford. And I think, from a campaign perspective, I think former President Trump has made the right decision to focus on what matters to most Americans, and that's affordable groceries and affordable living wage.
Obviously, issue one, and will probably determine the election. We're talking to Morgan Ortagus here on the Scott Sand Show. But as you look at the international conflicts and look at what's happening at the UN this week, it's odd to me that within the Republican Party, at least, there seems to be a lack of support for Ukraine, but we're willing to continue to support Israel. And I think we should be supporting both with financial aid, with military aid, and perhaps, if it comes to it, even with troops.
Yeah, I mean, listen, what you hope is that your friends and allies, are in the fight and can handle as much of it as they can on their own. We have obviously seen in the Middle East, and I think this is quite unfortunate. You and I talked about this before, that our U.S. Navy is seeing more action in the Middle East than they have seen since World War II, our ships and our sailors there. So to sort of think that we aren't involved, I think is wrong. I mean, it's funny because I keep getting this question of like, we're going to drag America in. I'm like, well, we've been dragged in because the Houthis have effectively tried to cut off commercial shipping in the Red Sea and in the CENTCOM theater writ large, and U.S. Navy ships are taking incoming from a terrorist group called the Houthis with ballistic missiles and other sophisticated weapons and drones. And by the way, the Houthis try to hit U.S. military and diplomatic facilities. They've tried to hit our consulate in Israel. So we are very much, whether we want to be or not, we're very much in this.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we're hurting ourselves. The Navy oiler Bighorn running aground apparently somewhere near Oman, which I think is going to leave the Fifth Fleet and the carrier strike force kind of scrambling for fuel. You're a naval officer. You would know better how the situation's going to play out there.
Yeah, I have not served on a ship, so I will leave that to far more sophisticated surface warfare officers that know a hell of a lot more than I do. We're
talking to Morgan Ortagus, Polaris-US.org, Polaris National Security. It's the Scott Sand Show. Morgan, take us inside the UN as the General Assembly is happening. Is this still a productive body? What's actually happening there this week?
I don't know. I'm not there, so I'll have to get a readout from people. I mean, there's so much going on in the sidelines, but short answer, is it a productive party? No. I mean, is it a productive organization? That ship has sailed a long time ago. It does need massive reform. I mean, the days of in the Trump administration when Nikki Haley was ambassador and we got the toughest sanctions ever at the UN on North Korea, those days are over. Russia now has a military alliance with North Korea. So I think, it's a body where people come together and debate and argue, and there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, and there's a lot of reform that could happen at the UN to make the institution more effective. You just need somebody who's really willing to be bold and push those reforms.
Yeah, would you like to share your thoughts on perhaps the biggest conflict of this coming weekend, the Alabama-Georgia football game?
Oh, gosh. I would much rather comment about global affairs and a fight with China than to get in the middle of that fight.
Morgan, it's always great to have you on. Thank you for your time as you walk through the streets of Midtown. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you, sir.